So the Sinnoh Cup is starting January 10th, and you might be wondering where to begin for the Sinnoh Cup. How do I build a good Sinnoh Cup team? Well, first things first, you're going to want to understand what's going on in the meta. So here I have my Sinnoh Cup simplified infographic for you. If you want a detailed explanation of the core meta or the core breakers and spice, link down below to my videos covering those topics and a Game Press article as well, going over just about everything you need to know for the Sinnoh Cup. This video is going to be focusing on the team building process and giving you some sample teams to pull ahead of the Sinnoh Cup. Get your feet wet, get started, and set yourself up for victory. So the quick TLDR of the Sinnoh Cup meta is that it's going to feel like a hard rock, paper, scissors meta that focuses on Bastiodon, Gastrodon, and a little bit with Razor Leafers kind of having some background noise. Now when it comes to the Razor Leafers in particular, a lot of the better Pokemon in the Cup can overcome the Razor Leafers when they're at a shield disadvantage or if they have a bit of an energy lead. So I think the Razor Leafers are going to kind of be like the charm users of this Cup, if that makes sense. There's some background noise that can catch you if you're unaware or if you're vulnerable to them, but if you're like slightly prepared or you're keeping Razor Leaf in the back of your mind, you should be able to manage them fairly well. The ones that you're really going to pay attention to and have a strategy built around though are going to be Bastiodon and Gastrodon. It's just things that beat Gastrodon typically lose to Bastiodon. Things that beat Bastiodon typically lose to Gastrodon. And there really isn't a whole lot of getting around that. So if you are setting up your team, you're going to want to make sure that you're not too vulnerable to either of these two Pokemon. And you're also going to want to base your pivot, your swap-in Pokemon, to something that pairs well should you be weak to either Bastiodon or Gastrodon. Focusing in on Bastiodon first, if you're leading with a Pokemon that is vulnerable to Bastiodon, chances are you're not going to overcome a Bastiodon with your lead Pokemon. What are you going to pair it with? Well, you're going to want to pivot to a fighting type like Lucario or Toxicroak, or maybe a neutral Pokemon with ground type attacks such as Munchlax or Licky Licky. Now you might be sitting back at home thinking, well, Ryan Swag, that sounds horrible. That's just like asking for me to get hard RPS. If I swap to like Lucario or Toxicroak, they're just going to bring in like Gastrodon, beat me there, and then my Pokemon's going to come in and sure they'll beat Gastrodon, but then Bastiodon's back in and now I'm hard RPS, Ryan. How am I supposed to pull out of this one? And the thing is yeah, chances are you are going to get RPS if you follow this strain of logic, and whatever possible swap in you'd like to work out also is going to be vulnerable to getting hard RPS. So what you got to do in the Sinnoh Cup is either pray that you're going to win the coin toss on the rock, paper, scissors here, or you got to prepare yourself to overcome that rock, paper, scissors by having energy leads and a shield advantage and damage advantage, right? So by swapping to these Pokemon force out Bastiodon almost right away for the most part, and the thing that comes in is going to get hurt by them. Sure, it might beat them, but you're going to deal a lot of damage before you go down. You don't have to spend a shield on your Pokemon, and you could possibly get shields from your opponent's Pokemon, and whatever you led with ideally will be strong against whatever countered your Pokemon, and then you just want to try to carry that advantage ahead into the end game there. Now, of course, another option is to lead a Pokemon that isn't vulnerable to Bastiodon, but now you've got another lead conundrum to contend with. And that's Gastrodon. So what do you do if your lead Pokemon is vulnerable to Gastrodon? Well, you'll probably want to pivot to Cresselia, Gliscor, Abomasnow, Frostlass, or Roserade, possibly. Other grass-type Pokemon could work too. I just like Roserade a little bit more because it's got the fire-type attacks to back itself up with, and it's got the big Leaf Storm to kind of threaten things with too. So I kind of like the Roserade a little bit more as a pivot. When it comes to these pivot options, like the most sane sounding one is definitely the Cresselia, because Cresselia is a bulky neutral Pokemon that has play into most things. But when it comes to the other suggestions, you are a bit vulnerable to getting hard countered. But once again, the thing is that if your opponent doesn't have a response to that Pokemon right away, like a good response to them, then that can set you up for victory. And if they do have a good response to it, well, you could put some big damage on them, maybe get a shield from them, and try to set yourself up better for the late game. Once again, it's a rock, paper, scissors meta. You're not always going to win the swap and have swap advantage against these hard RPS Pokemon, so you have to set yourself up for victory in other ways. And then we have the third kind of lead. The lead that is strong against both Gastrodon and Bastiodon at the same time, which is basically just like Gliscor and Gallade, or using a Gastrodon yourself. The main pivot that makes sense to me for this team would be Drapion or Shadow Drapion, and that's because if you lose the lead, chances are Drapion or Shadow Drapion are going to scare that Pokemon away. And if they do hard RPS that with like a fighting type Pokemon or their own Gastrodon, well, then you can just eliminate that Pokemon pretty easily, usually with the Gastrodon yourself, especially after they're weakened, and then you eliminate that fighting type or a ground type threat for the end game. Man, this all sounds a whole lot nicer than the other two scenarios I was describing. Like, the other ones are like, oh shit, man, I'm gonna die no matter what. Like, I lost the lead, I gotta swap to this thing and just pray that they don't have an answer in the back. Come on, please. With this one, it's like, I got the good lead. Oh, I lost the lead? I'm gonna swap the Drapion. It's all working for me. Then on to the canned teams. Team number 1 here is going to be the Big Bad Medaline. Basically the team that everyone aspires to be in this cup, using 3 of the bulkiest, strongest, most threatening RPS Pokemon that the Sinnoh Cup has to offer. For this team, you can lead with either Bastiodon or Gastrodon. I do feel like leading with Cresselia is a little bit too much of a risk, because if you don't end up winning the lead, or your opponent doesn't swap out of the lead, then your ability to maintain that hard RPS setup could fall apart. Because with this team, once you start to lose the RPS situation, things could start to fall apart pretty quickly there. But once again, very solid, very strong general line, and will work against most teams. Team number 2 here is a core-based team, which is basically the Gastrodon Drapion core, kind of hinted at in that third section there, right? These two Pokemon just work out really well. Gastrodon beats so many stuff in this cup, and things that it doesn't beat generally don't want to deal with Drapion. And in the endgame situation, you just want to make sure you're not terribly vulnerable to Bastiodon or Grass-type Pokemon, or maybe even Gastrodon itself. You do have some strength or play against all 3 of those threats, and I see that most with Abomasnow or Lucario, although a lot of other Pokemon could work in the back here. Even Bastiodon itself could work in the back here for this team. But for the most part, this core here, I really do like this core. Then our third team here is Bastiodon and Cresselia once again, but without Gastrodon. And the basic idea behind this line is it's basically like the Grass Hole combo, with Cresselia being kind of a smarter Grass-type Pokemon, because true Dark-type Pokemon really don't threaten it when it comes to this cup. Like when it comes to the Open Great League, you swap to Cresselia, you're probably going to be meeting a strong, powerful, scary Dark-type Pokemon. In this cup, the scariest thing that Cresselia has to worry about is going to be like a Drapion, and Drapion doesn't have the nicest matchup against Cresselia to begin with, so I think Cresselia kind of works out better as a grass type for a grass hole type combo. And then for the final Pokemon, you could go with Gallade as a Pokemon that's not a grass type but does have grass type attacks, right? To throw people off expecting you to do a Razor Leafer in the back, or you could just use a Razor Leafer in the back, such as Grotle or Shadow Grotle, Torterra, Shadow Torterra. You could also go for a Grass Hole combo as well. That combo is pretty powerful and can wear down opponents, so if you want to forego Cresselia for another Razor Leafer, that's also an option. This next line is kind of a different approach to the Bastiodon, Gastrodon kind of conundrum, kind of focusing on wearing these Pokemon out rather than directly pivot countering them, while also still kind of pivot countering them. Basically, you're using Cresselia or Wormadam, and you're backing it up with one of these 2 fighting type Pokemon as a pivot. And then in the back, you're going to have a steel type Pokemon based on whatever scenario endgame you're expecting to run into. Empoleon sounds really nice, but Bastiodon obviously has the Bastiodon factor to it. The idea with Cresselia is that you want to bait in Pokemon that Cresselia is strong against by using the fighting type pivot, so you can clean up with the Cresselia, and even if you are vulnerable to Bastiodon with the Cresselia there, Cresselia can kind of wear out the Bastiodon, especially with the prior damage, and even if Bastiodon fells the Cresselia here, well then you can clean up in the endgame with your own big steel type Pokemon. When it comes to Wormadam doesn't pivot away from the Gastrodon lead, even though it more often than not will lose the Gastrodon lead. It's actually there to kind of wear out the Gastrodon, because for Gastrodon to overcome the Wormadam, it kind of has to take the fight all the way to the end, and it has to close out the fight by throwing energy to effectively counter the Wormadam, which means that Gastrodon's like in the red, so your fighting type or your steel type could come in, take a couple mud slaps, but finish it off, then have an energy lead, and have Gastrodon kind of removed as a threat for the end game, setting things up much better for your steel type Pokemon. A little bit of a riskier setup, but could be big brain. right? And then for our final team here, we got Gliscor with the Drapion. So once again, you have a Pokemon that is strong against Bastiodon and Gastrodon, and then to pivot away from lost leads, you have the Drapion. And then, of course, you want to hard counter things as well, so that's where Roserade and Lucario in the back come in. And then once again, because this is a duo core kind of focused team, you could have just about anything in the back that makes sense to you. I kind of like Roserade here because it does have that quick fire-type access, and then it also has the big, heavy Leaf Storm to close out games with. And then Lucario is kind of fragile, but if it does ramp up with an energy lead, well, then it has the explosive Shadow Ball and sometimes close combat to threaten with too. And then as an added treat, we got a bonus 6th team for you, the Cynthia Core, featuring her 2 most iconic Pokemon, Garchomp and Lucario. This team actually isn't a total meme because Garchomp is kind of like spicy Gastrodon. It's like Gastrodon, but better in some ways, weaker in other ways. So using either Drapion or Cresselia as a pivot and then trying to close in the endgame with Lucario, that's the Cynthia Core for you. So fun, spicy team. Actually isn't too terribly bad, but is maybe a little bit more of a meme than the other teams here. So that wraps it up for my sample teams and team building tips for the Sinnoh Cup meta. If you have any questions on this content, of course, comment below, let me know what's up, and I'll be happy to help you out. But before you ask, if you haven't seen my Sinnoh Cup meta simplified or my Sinnoh Cup Core Breakers and Spice Picks videos, link in the description to those 2 videos, and they'll probably answer a lot of questions you might have about the Sinnoh Cup. And of course, if you enjoy this type of content and you want to see more like it, make sure to subscribe to SwagTips. I'd also like to give a special shout out to these Patreon supporters. If you want to support Swagman on Patreon, link in the description. And then, what if you're leading Drapion? I don't know. I don't know what you do then. Pivot to Cresselia because you're kind of fighting weak.